Friends, welcome to Worldwide Wisdom, and today we're talking about self-hating Jews. This is not a new phenomenon. It's been happening for thousands of years. There's something with the Jews that they just can't get past, get comfortable with their own identity. This is some Jews. And the question is, what do we do with those self-loathing Jews? The Talmud times 2,000 years ago, the sages instituted a prayer which we recite not once a day, not twice a day, but 3 times a day. We recite this prayer which is about the downfall of the evil within the self-loathing Jews. Now, it's interesting. It's debatable. It's questionable if it means that the self-loathing Jews themselves should die, or if it means that the evil within them should be eradicated. Either way, we're learning about the history and the context of this very interesting enigma, and it appears in the Talmud Brachas. We're on page 300 in Yaakov, where we learned yesterday. We started part 1 of the series of how the 18 blessings and the pinnacle of prayer and the silent Amidah are not enough, because 18 Shemona Esrei is the name of the silent prayer, the Amidah, which means standing. There's actually 19 prayers in the 18 Amidah blessings, right? That's amazing. We call it 18, but it's really got 19. It's just it's like for tax, you know? Yeah, it's very Jewish accounting.
It's like a baker's dozen.
A baker's dozen. A baker's dozen is 13, right?
Right. Yeah.
Oh, that's a really good example. How did a baker's dozen ever become 13?
They used to throw an extra. There's a Jewish guy said,
oh, they used to throw an extra.
Can't you give me something?
You know what? I've got so much volume, I'm going to put in 1 extra. So baker's dozen became 13. Very nice. Good.
Charge you for 13 days.
So you know what this means, guys? You know what this changes? This changes the future of all contributions, of all tzedakah donations. A Jewish chai is now
19.
There you go. So it's not 180, it's 190. It's 19,000, not 18,000, folks. You got to raise the bar. It's a baker's dozen. It's a Talmud 18. See, here it goes. And maybe the golf course as well. It's going to have to be 19 holes. Okay, so the Talmud tells the story of how this all started. Rabbi Gamliel was the great Rebbe, page 300. Rabbi Gamliel was the Rebbe of the academy in Yavne, and he asked the question, is there anyone who knows how to institute the blessing for the heretics? Is there anybody who knows how to formulate the blessing for the self-loathing Jews? Shmuel HaKatan stood up and instituted it. Now, this is not just somebody who had a few free minutes or somebody who had a pen handy to come up with the prayer for the self-loathing Jews. This had to be somebody who was so humble, so transparent, so pure, so lacking of an ulterior motive. Only such a person would be capable of coining a template for a blessing that would be able to serve all self-loathing Jews without a personal axe to grind. So here he was. He wrote up the blessing. Then a year later, the following year, I don't know why it took him a whole year, but he forgot about it. He forgot the blessing. Let's see now. When he forgot the blessing a year later, they let him stand there for 2 to 3 hours, leading the congregation, trying to fumble his way through, trying to remember his own blessing, for heaven's sake. What are you doing up there? The question is, in general, when you have somebody up on the bima who is fumbling through the heretic blessing, you throw him off the bima, you replace him ASAP. Why? Because we suspect that he himself might have become a heretic himself. And there were such cases in the Talmud where, for example, there was a guy, last week we went around the bima 7 times on our Shana Rabbah with the lulav and the esrog, right? So, and we beat the willows. So in temple times, they would do that around the altar. There was a Kohen up on the top over there who was supposed to pour the water down the altar. I don't know how to say this in a nice way. Not a drain, but like a laver, maybe? Is that a nice word for pouring? A laver? There was some sort of a sink, a basin up there on the altar where you're supposed to pour the water. But now the idea of pouring libations of water is something derived only from the oral Torah. See, in the written Torah, it doesn't say that there are water libations on Sukkot. How do we know that there are water libations on Sukkot? Toby, you referenced this the other day. You may not have realized. You remember in each of the lanings of the Sukkot, everyone is identical except for 3 words. Unesocheha v'niskehem. Very slight nuances. Mem, Yud, Mem. Exactly. So you knew. Mem, Yud, Mem. There are basically 3 extra letters And it's those 3 extra letters that spell the word mayim. Mayim spells water. And it's from this very subtle difference, that we're able to extract that there from the oral Torah. We extract this notion, this idea that there is a water libation on Sukkot. So this guy was up on the altar, and he did not pour the water. So what did the people do when they realized that they had a heretic on top of the altar, a Kohen on top of the altar, on a Shiner Rabbah? They took their esrogs and they pelted him to death. They threw their esrogs at him, and the guy died from stoning by esrog. Right, but this guy reached the highest echelons of Jewish leadership in the priesthood, and he was a heretic. So here you have a guy who's on the bima and he's praying and he fumbles his way through the heretic blessing. You take him down. Yet Shmuel caught and they didn't remove. Why did they remove him? Because Shmuel, they said, was so good that he could never become bad. And that is such a big topic, friends. Is there such a person that's infallible? Is there a person that's infallible? I mean, that's almost idolatrous. Think about that.
Even Moshe wasn't infallible.
Even Moshe, let's think about that. Was Moses fallible? Is fallible a word? Or is just infallible?
That's a word. Fallible.
Infallible. So Moses, you say, was fallible.
He got angry.
Well, Moses was denied access to the promised land.
Right, yeah.
Moses hit the rock. The question is, why he hit the rock? The question is, did he actually lose his temper? I want to tell you something. I'm going to give an example where I believe Moses was fallible. I'm going to give an example where Moses was fallible. This is one of the great defining moments of my life. Moses, when he's at the very beginning of his career, when he was told, when he sees the Egyptian striking the Jew, he kills the Egyptian. The next day he sees a Jew striking a Jew. So he approaches them and reprimands the striker. The striker says to him, "Why are you going to kill me like you killed the Egyptian yesterday? I'm going to report you to Pharaoh." Now, Moses' response is a defining moment in Jewish spirituality. No, he doesn't run away. He fears. His emotional reaction is fearful, and therefore he runs away. Now, the Jewish spirituality teaches us that that emotional reaction was incorrect. What he should have reacted with was with confidence, equanimity, and trust in God Almighty. Had he reacted with trust in God Almighty, then the outcome would have been favorable. Because he reacted with a lack of trust, with fear, therefore the outcome was unfavorable. Pharaoh tried to execute him, and it was one of those. Execution malfunctions. Execution malfunction. It's a story in the Medrash. Maybe we'll learn it one day, where they try to execute him, and bam, his neck turned to marble. So he was able to escape. But there you go. Good example, Harvey, that even Moses was fallible. So what, pray tell, is the Talmud trying to tell us here? When the Talmud tells us that that Shmuel HaKatan was not removed from the podium, from the bima, because they were not worried that he would ever fall. Good morning to all of our viewers live and later, to Stacy and Corey, to Witness Protection, Jacob the Jew, and to Leah that I can see are with us. Good. Let's go. So now, why did Shmuel HaKatan forget the prayer? I'm on page 301 and note 25. At that time, writing down the oral Torah, including the blessings, was forbidden. Thus, all praying was done from memory. Ooh. Okay, that gives us some interesting context into the story. Apparently, at this point, the blessings of the heretics was not yet commonly recited by everyone. Thus, although Shmuel HaKatan had himself composed this blessing, he had forgotten its exact wording over the year. Okay, sounds good, makes sense. Now, I'd like to go into the bottom of page 301. Why did they need to make a special blessing for the heretics? For the self-hating Jews. Now, what was the context in those days? The self-hating Jews in those days were embarrassed about the Judaism, so they would report the Jews. Jacob, you can ask a question. Yes, indeed. Post it here, and if it's relevant, I'll try to respond. The question is, who are these heretics? They were embarrassed of the Judaism. Do you know Jews like this? Do you know Jews that are embarrassed about being Jewish?
Sure.
It's so No names, folks. Folks, we're on camera here.
He's a friend of yours.
Besides, by the way, the Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya, you're supposed to love every single Jew, Marty. Every single Jew is supposed to love. What about the Jews that you're supposed to hate? What about the Jews you're supposed to hate? You're supposed to hate. Why? Because they're evil. The Alter Rebbe introduces us to parts therapy. You know what parts therapy is? Anybody know what IFS is? Internal Family Systems?
Yes.
Richard Schwartz. This is an emerging wisdom, which is very modern today, but the Alter Rebbe introduced it to us in the end of the 18th century when he published the Tanya. He tells us that a person is not a sum total. So a person is not binary. So this or that. Republican or Democrat. You're either pro-Trump or you're anti-Trump. Either pro-Israel or anti-Israel. That doesn't work like that. There's, you're either an anti-Semite or you're a pro-Semite. It doesn't work like that. Human beings are complex. And even people that you think are anti-Semites might only a part of them doesn't like Israel. Only a part of them doesn't like Jews, right? But other parts of them do like Jews. And you have to compartmentalize human beings. There's, like if you're in a bad mood right now, I tell my kids, if you're in a bad mood, are you in a bad mood? Or is a part of you in a bad mood? Like, let's talk about this. Are you in a bad mood because your brother took away the toy? Which means you're not in a bad mood. You're in a good mood. You just want the toy that your brother has. So you're annoyed about one particular detail of your day, but 99% of your day is actually going very well. You're doing well, right? So this is how you're supposed to compartmentalize, right? So the Alter Rebbe says you're supposed to love the Jew in him, and you're supposed to hate the evil that has taken the Jew in him hostage, right? So in other words, like a Jewish hostage in Gaza, let's say, right? It's not their fault that they're in Gaza, right? So you love them, you just hate the terrorist that holds them hostage. Same thing with your fellow Jew that is a self-hating Jew. You love the Jew because he's your fellow Jew. He's a hostage in Gaza. He's a hostage in a dark dungeon. Who you hate is the evil that's making him hostage. So your brother, who doesn't even realize that he's your brother, your brother doesn't even have the sense and the clarity to realize that he is a Jew and he has nothing to be embarrassed of because he's a hostage. Poor guy. Why is he a hostage? Because he never got a Jewish education. You know who his parents were. You know where he was raised. You know what kind of traumas this guy endured. You know what kind of Hebrew school teacher he had that traumatized him for life, right? It's not his fault. You see what I'm saying?
And the journey is a journey of redemption.
The journey is a journey of redemption. Exactly. The journey is a journey of redemption. We've got to search out and find the light. You got to know where you're going.
Can
Oh, good. Yeah?
No, it's still Owen.
Go ahead.
The time of this, was this the Hellenistic time or?
It's after the Hellenistic time. This is not the Greek era. This is the Roman era. The Romans conquered the Greeks, even though the Greeks really conquered the Romans, because ideologically the Greek culture dominated Rome. The Romans had no culture. They were just brute warriors. But the Greeks were thinkers, philosophers, had a culture. So even though the Romans conquered the Greeks, the Greek culture actually passed over. Good. Now, so let's talk about why was there a unique blessing for the heretics? The Dubin and Bagi, the bottom of 301. Wonders why the blessing against sectarians are not incorporated into the total count of blessings, as we still refer to that. I mean, there's 18, a baker's dozen, a Jewish 18, right? True, this 19th blessing was composed at a later time, but since its introduction under Rabbi Gamliel, it has served as an integral part of the prayer. So why do we call it the 19? I mean, how hard would it be to just call it the 19? The Chayesrei. There is a golf course here in Palm Beach Gardens, by the way, that has the 19th hole, just saying. What? All golf courses have a 19th hole? What?
It's a bar.
No. There's actually a golf course that has a 19th hole here. Yeah, here in Old Palm. They have like a little island. You ever played Old Palm? They have a 19th hole. They also have a bar. Don't worry about it. Okay. So the answer suggests is that this blessing is unique not only in the timing of its origin, but also in its nature. It is the only blessing that praises God for not giving us a positive benefit like knowledge, the ability to repent, or forgiveness, but rather this blessing is not focused on a gift from God, but for removing a negative force that threatens our well-being, a force that did not become strong enough for such serious concern, until the days of Rabbi Gamliel and Yavne. Thus, even if this blessing is just as important and just as precious to God as any of the other 18 blessings, it is still not included in the count because of its different nature. It's really like a negative focus here. An analogy can be drawn to a wealthy person counting his earnings, who would typically not include the money he barely managed to collect from a recalcitrant borrower, even though for a time it appeared as though he might have to write off the bad loan as a loss. He would still refrain from including the recovered loan on his list of earnings because it did not give him a new infusion of money and merely prevented him from losing money that was already in his possession. It was the loan that he managed to recover, right? In the same way, Hashem's efforts to stymie the heretics do not give us anything new. They merely save us from losing the spiritual treasures already in our possession. Okay, so let's see what happens next. Okay, so why did they not remove him? Let's try to understand what happened over here, why they didn't remove him. So we said in the Talmud on page 302 that the reason they didn't remove him is because we have a tradition set up by that a good person does not become bad. The Gemara says, but 1 second. It says in Ezekiel, when a righteous man turns away from his righteousness and practices corruption. So we see that there is such a thing as a good man becoming bad. The Gemara answers, no. That was a person who was originally wicked and then became bad. Sorry, originally wicked became good and then it goes back to default of being bad. But this guy was by default good. What does this even mean? What are we talking about? Original sin now? Like what is going on? Right? I thought everybody's good. Everybody was created pure and good, and they're hijacked by the evil within them. So what really is going on over here? So the Gemara challenges this answer as well. How can you say that somebody who was originally good, whatever that means, cannot go bad? We learned in the Mishnah, do not believe in yourself that you will not sin until the day you die. So don't ever become complacent on your spirituality and your piety. For Yochanan, the high priest, served as Kohen Gadol for 80 years. This guy was a devoted, successful high priest who was vetted every Yom Kippur by God himself in the Holy of Holies. If he would have been inauthentic, he would have died. Yet he managed to be righteous for 80 years, and then he still became a heretic at the end of his life. He became, according to one opinion, Yanai, who was the king of the Hasmonean Jewish kingdom. These were corrupt Jewish kings who actually executed the sages. Can you imagine Yochanan Kohen Gadol, after having been so righteous, becomes evil? So what's going on? So the Gemara concludes its question on page 303. This is where we reached. Now, it is not difficult, according to Abaye, who says that Yochanan and Yanai were the same person, for then there is proof that a person, there's no proof that a person who was always good can turn bad. So according to Abaye, who says that they were the same person, there's no proof that a person who was always good can turn bad. Why is that? Why is that not possible? Since note 7, since Yanai was the same person as Yochanan, and Yanai is known to have been bad from the start. When he became a Sadducee toward the end of his life, he was really returning to his original ways. Therefore, we have no proof that someone who's righteous all his life can go straight to the end, right? So according to the opinion, we know Yanai started off as a sour apple. So if you're going to say that Yochanan and Yanai were the same person, like Abaye says, then we have no challenge to the position of Abaye, who said earlier that a good person doesn't become bad. But according to Rava, who says that Yochanan was not the same person as Yanai, and Yochanan was indeed actually righteous from the start. Now it is difficult for we see that even a person who was always good can turn bad. Why then did the sages allow Shmuel HaKatan to continue his prayer without concern that he might have become a heretic? So if you're going to say that Yochanan and Yanai, Yochanan the high priest and Yanai the evil king, were two different people, then Yochanan seems to be a guy that was good from the start. He was a high priest for 80 years. And he turned out bad. So why he lost his faith? So why then would they not have removed Shmuel from his position? So the Talmud answers as follows. Rava will tell you, indeed, we are concerned that even someone who was originally righteous might have changed and become wicked. If so, why then did they not remove Shmuel HaKatan? Because Shmuel HaKatan was different. Since he began to write the blessing, and only then did he make a mistake. Since he began to recite the blessing, and only then did he make a mistake. This is, as Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, and some say it was Rabbi Shua ben Levi, the law that someone who makes a mistake in the blessings of the heretics is removed applies only when he did not actually begin to say the blessing. If he started the words of the blessing and then he gets confused, we don't take him down. But if he began the blessing and then he made the mistake, he may complete it. Since he started the blessing, we see for sure that he's not a heretic. He merely became confused afterwards. Right? Okay, so we have some clarity over here. We now understand everyone who was good can become bad. Even if he was good in the beginning, can become bad, according to the position of Rava. Why then did they not take down Shmuel from the Bima when he was messing around, when he was fumbling his way through the blessing of the self-hating Jews? The reason is because he had actually started the blessing. And once you start saying the blessing and you get mixed up in the details, remember they didn't write it down, didn't have a sitter, they had to pray for memory, then you were not worried that he's a heretic. But if he never started the blessing and now he just pauses, we chuck him. Okay, let's just dive deeper into the notes here at the bottom of the page, 303 from good to bad. As many commentators point out, the story of Yochanan as understood by Rava seems to contradict the Gemara's statement elsewhere in Yuma. For anyone who has lived most of his life in righteousness will no longer sin. The Gemara there says that anyone who lived most of his life in righteousness won't sin. If Yochanan served as the Kohen Gadol for 80 years, we may assume that he had already passed the halfway point of his life and had lived most of his years as the righteous leader of the nation. How then could he have become a heretic afterwards? So we actually have an interesting question, a fundamental question, where the Talmud in Yuma says that someone who lived most of his life in righteousness won't sin, versus the story of Rabbi Yochanan who lived 80 years as a high priest and then ended up a sour apple. So how does this work? Yismach Moshe offers two solutions to this problem. One is that the protection against sin provided to someone who completes a majority of his years is in righteousness protects against unintentional sin, but not against deliberate sin, where the once righteous person consciously chooses to turn onto the path of sin. Since human beings always have free will, such a determined sinner will not be blocked from his chosen path. So that's one way of answering it, that the guarantee or the warranty here for the person who's lived half his life in righteousness is that he won't come to unintentional sin, but if he actively chooses deliberate sin, he's not going to be protected. Another solution, it's like those home appliance warranties. You buy these home appliance warranties. No matter what happens, they tell you, you're going to be covered. Your ice maker, your fridge, your AC, everything. Then it breaks down, you call them. Oh, this is not covered. And that's not covered. Oh, and the other, that's also not covered. And so by the exclusions, right? So he would say, if you live half your life in piety, you're never going to sin. Except if you did it on purpose. Yeah.
Rabbi, is it not true that, labels aside, inside of all of us, there's a good wolf and a bad wolf? And depending upon which wolf we feed is how we live?
Yeah, I would agree. Good wolf, I call it a good soul and a bad soul.
Yes.
I wouldn't even call it a bad soul. I call it a selfish soul and a selfless soul. This is basic Tanya, and I encourage you to study Tanya with me on YouTube at jewishgardens.com/soul, where you can study the whole Tanya with me. It's an awesome experience. But yeah, there's two souls within us. And the question is, how do you identify? What do you do in your free time? Do you indulge your selfish part of you, or do you nurture the selfless part of you? And that's how you know which part of you identify with. So I would agree with you, sir, that there's a oscillating dynamic here, where we're in perpetual motion as opposed to being locked into one gear. We're constantly on the threshold of sin, as God told Cain in last week's Torah portion. When Cain killed Abel, he said, "La pesach chatos revetz." The sin is crouching at the threshold. In other words, you drop your guards down for a moment, you're toast.
And so is the goodness.
That's an interesting question. If the goodness is crouching at the door, I think it takes a little more effort to... I think the marketing of evil is far more seductive than the marketing of good. That's why the nightclubs have more people than the shuls. Okay. All right. So let's do another solution. Is that Rabbi Yochanan of the Gemara not only chose the path of sin for his future, but he also regretted the righteous path that he had followed for the previous 80 years. Second answer. Now there is a principle that someone who regrets the good deeds of the past loses all credit for them. You know, if you gave charity that you couldn't afford, and then your wife found out, and she gave you over the head, and you were sleeping in the doghouse for a night or two, right? The question is, should you regret the charity or not? So the answer is, you're not supposed to regret the mitzvah ever. Don't ever regret the mitzvah, because if you ever regret a mitzvah, can't believe I spent so much money on this lulav and esrog. I can't believe we put our kid through this Jewish private school education, right? If you regret it, then you lose the credit, right? We can therefore suggest that when Yochanan became a Sadducee and rejected the fundamentals of faith under which he had acted righteously for so long, he regretted adhering to those tenets of faith that he now professed to be unfounded. He then lost the credit for all those acts of righteousness, and it can no longer be said that he lived most of his years in righteousness. He had undone the past. He no longer had the warranty of the 51% of his life, since the record of his last 80 years were now devoid of any good deeds. Others explain that a sin is not merely a wrongful act; it is a symptom of a disease. And a sin is not merely a wanton act. It is a symptom of a disease, a spiritual one. It is therefore shares some qualities with physical diseases. Now, when it comes to promoting one's physical health, there are many practices that almost guarantee a life of good health. Rambam details many of these practices, but with one caveat. He says these prudent measures can be relied upon at all times, except during an epidemic, when the spread of disease can defeat any precautions a person might take. In such times, the very air is contaminated with germs that can sicken even a fundamentally strong and healthy person. So therefore, when we talk about Rabbi Yochanan, the high priest, could it be that at that time, during the Roman era, there was a corruption in the air, which actually was like an epidemic that overrides healthy practices? That's what he's suggesting. The same is true for an epidemic of spiritual disease. During Yochanan's tenure as high priest, the spread of Sadducean heresies reached epidemic proportions in that atmosphere. The usual protections against sin, including one's success in living 51% of his years in righteousness, could not guarantee one's spiritual health. And thus there was nothing to protect Yochanan from succumbing to the corrupt effects of the Sadducean plague. And that would be the explanation, 3 different explanations as to why it was that somebody who was good could end up being bad. Didn't God take Enoch for that reason? Chanoch. Question from Brenda. So Hanoch was taken away in the portion last week because God didn't want him to become corrupt by others. So God took him, the Torah says. Oh, he was gone, basically. He was like, he disappeared. Because God didn't want him to become corrupt, because God saw that he was going to become corrupt. So he plucked him before he would be able to fall into sin. So I'm not sure, how does that connect to what we're talking about? Yeah, I mean, I guess it shows you, according to the third answer, that even a righteous person can fall. Absolutely. Even a righteous person can fall. And that's really what our conclusion is today, is that a righteous person is able to fall, according to the Talmud's position. Abaya has a unique view that a righteous person who's originally righteous, whatever that means, we need to come to clarity of that. You know what I think it means? I do have an answer for you. I'm going to give you an answer right now. I'm going to give you an answer. The answer, I believe, is from Tanya. Because Tanya tells us that there's 3 kinds of Jews. There's the wicked, the Rasha, the Beinoni, the middle, struggler, and then there's a tzaddik. What's a tzaddik according to Tanya? A tzaddik, according to Tanya, is a guy that has slaughtered and transformed his evil inclination. He no longer has an evil inclination. That's a tzaddik, which means he can't fall. Why can't he fall? Because there's nothing there for making him fall. He has successfully slaughtered his evil inclination. It's not there anymore. That's who Abaya is talking about. Abaya is talking about a perfectly righteous Jew that has successfully transformed his evil inclination to the point he doesn't have one anymore. So he's not going to fall. Evolved. The one who Rava is talking about, Rava was talking about the Beinoni. The Beinoni is the guy who has an evil inclination within him. He just is vigilant on him all the time. Constantly vigilant. And therefore, as long as you got your guards up, you're good. But the moment you drop your guards, he's going to come out. And that's why, according to Rava, they were worried. Why shouldn't they be worried about Shmuel HaKatan? Because Rava did not want to assume that Shmuel HaKatan was a tzaddik. He says maybe he's a Beinoni. Why did Rava not want to assume this? Because Rava's Rebbe, his name was Rabbah. Rava's Rebbe, his name was Rabbah. What is Rabbah? Rabbah said about himself. Rabbah said about himself famously, if you want to know what a struggling Jew is, me, for example. Rabbah was the great Rabbah, the great teacher of Rabbah. If he considered himself, why did he consider himself a struggling Jew? Because he, even though we know that he was a tzaddik who had slaughtered his evil inclination, but in his exceeding humility, he said, I haven't slaughtered my evil inclination, I'm just keeping it in check. So Rava and Abaya, both students of Rabbah, they struggled with being able to label, to define a perfectly righteous Jew? Is he perfectly righteous because he slaughtered his evil inclination? Or is he perfectly righteous because he maintains, keeps it in check? So this would explain, based on Tanya, we can perfectly understand this Talmud. Everything falls into place so beautifully. The position of Abayu, who says that the perfectly righteous will not fall because he's a perfect tzaddik. The position of Rava is that even a perfectly righteous can't fall. That's because he's still a Beinoni. We can't ever assume. Don't ever assume that you're a tzaddik. Before you're born, the Talmud in Nida tells us you made to swear. I'm going to strive. Before your soul is born, I will strive to be a tzaddik. I will strive to be perfectly righteous. And even if the whole world tells me that I'm a tzaddik, I will consider myself as if I am a rasha. What does that mean? It means that even though the whole world says that I'm a tzaddik, I'm perfect, I'm perfectly righteous, I will never buy that, because I will always consider it as if my evil inclination is still there. It's just sleeping, not executed. And therefore, the question is the worldview of these two sages. Do they look at themselves and others as having transformed their evil, or do they look at themselves and others as having just managed their evil and put them into a state of a coma, at which point they can rise at any time? Fascinating piece of Talmud that can only be understood in light of Jewish mysticism, in light of Tanya. That's awesome stuff, guys. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.